London, 1834. Everyone said Laura smiled too easily for a girl who was not truly invited. They were not wrong. She hid in plain sight. She held her chin steady. She wore hope like borrowed lace. Morning mist curled over Covent Garden. Vendors shouted prices with theatrical zeal. Carriages rattled like impatient drums. The city smelled of pears, ink, and ambition. Laura moved through it in a red empire gown with fine lace at the neckline. The color made the gossips twitch. Red meant heart. Red meant scandal. Red meant the courage she was not supposed to have. Her hair was a storm of dark curls. Her gloves were mended with invisible stitches. Her reticule held a list for bread, ribbons, and forgetfulness. Her smile was practiced. Her eyes told the truth. Her sister Helena did not buy bread. Helena bought opinions. Helena wore powder blue and certainty. Helena called Laura too soft, too kind, too easily pleased. Helena was not wrong, and yet somehow entirely wrong. Rejection had become Laura's second corset. It pinched at family breakfasts. It bruised at afternoon calls. It tightened whenever someone mentioned marriage. It never quite let her breathe. That morning the market turned its head. He had arrived. Leonardo, Duke of Ashbourne, 40 and impossible to ignore. Wealth moved with him like a tide. A black tailcoat, a waistcoat stitched with dark gold, a white cravat tied with deadly precision, a signet ring that caught the weak sun and made it obey. People parted. Bananas and debutantes arranged themselves. Mothers revised their daughters. Fathers revised their debts. Helena revised her smile. Laura did not look up at first. She was busy choosing pears with a gentleness that made the seller soften. She noticed the bruised fruit first. She took it anyway. Kindness like that tends to ruin reputations. The Duke watched from 3 stalls away. He saw the way she tucked the bruised pear at the top of the basket. He saw the careful hands. He saw a woman the ton called forgettable doing a small unforgettable thing. He was a man trained to price everything. He could not price that. London buzzed with arithmetic. Titles plus dowries. Dances plus whispers. Kisses minus consequences. Leonardo preferred proofs written in action. Helena drifted closer with her entourage of opinions. She announced to the air that some girls smile when they have nothing worth smiling about. The air applauded. Laura steadied her basket. A single tear tried to misbehave. She gave it no permission. The Duke stepped nearer. He did not ask a name. He studied the lace at Laura's wrists. He measured the tremor that was not quite visible. He noticed the riddle written on her face. What smiles without joy and dries without sun? He liked riddles that sounded like judgments. He liked answers that became mercies. He knew her smile was a veil. He knew the tear would dry when someone finally chose her. A redingote brushed his sleeve as a lady rushed past. A bonnet tipped in apology. The market exhaled. Laura reached for a sprig of rosemary. The scent rose like a memory of kinder rooms. He reached for the same sprig. Their gloves met with a hush the crowd could not hear. Heat traveled faster than propriety. He admired her restraint. She admired nothing at all and therefore survived. He said nothing, yet the silence between them became a sentence the city would one day repeat. Choose what others throw away. Choose it twice. Choose it until it learns it is precious. Helena's laughter rang like a small bell that wanted to be a cannon. She told the vendor to keep the finest for ladies who mattered. The vendor looked at the red dress. He hesitated. Money teaches hesitation to kneel. He obeyed Helena. The Duke did not move. He adjusted his cuff with leisurely menace. Power should never rush. He nodded once to the vendor. Gold slipped like warm butter. The bruised pears were weighed again and called perfect. The perfect pears were weighed again and called insufficient. Laura raised her chin. Thank you lived behind her teeth. Pride stood guard. She would not bend for a favor she had not asked. His eyes approved the refusal. A shadow fell across the stall. Lady Malvern arrived with her court of icicles. Her silks cracked like fresh gossip. Her diamonds translated light into warnings. She had purchased half the season and intended to buy the rest. She surveyed Laura's red gown as if it were a legal offense. She surveyed Helena as if she might be useful. She surveyed the Duke as if he belonged to her ledger. She announced that some charity projects are charming until they begin to expect respect. The crowd pretended not to hear and heard everything. The Duke's mouth almost smiled. Almost is the most dangerous distance. He took a single step. The step men take when battle becomes sport. He touched the rosemary sprig and left it in Laura's basket. A promise without paper. Count the scarlet threads and you will find me. That thought pressed against her ribs like a secret note. She did not know why. She knew only that the city had tilted. Helena moved to claim the Duke's attention with a practiced question about horses. Lady Malvern moved to claim the narrative with a colder question about lineage. The Duke ignored both questions. He looked at Laura as if the market had been built for this minute. He did not rescue her. He did something worse. He respected her. Thunder rolled somewhere that was not the sky. It was the sound of a reputation beginning to rearrange itself. Laura felt the change like pins loosening. Every breath hurt a little less. A page boy elbowed through the crowd. He carried a cream envelope sealed with black wax. The crest was a rampant lion strangled by ivy. The boy asked for Miss Laura of the red dress. The crowd rippled. Helena reached first. Lady Malvern tilted to read. The Duke watched Laura's hands. Laura broke the seal with steady fingers. The letter carried no signature, only a single line written in a hand that knew how to command and how to beg. Meet me at midnight in the winter garden. Bring the smile that lies and the tear that tells the truth. Laura looked up. Helena's mouth shaped triumph. Lady Malvern's eyes sharpened like knives in velvet. The Duke's gaze did not flicker. The bells of St. Paul's began to count the hour. The market held its breath. Laura folded the letter and hid it against her heart. She made a choice that would taste like scandal and salvation. She lifted her basket. She walked away in her red gown, lace brushing at courage. The city followed with greedy ears. Behind her, the Duke turned to the vendor. He purchased nothing and purchased everything. He let the rumor begin. At midnight, the winter garden would either bless her or ruin her. One path would make her a duchess. The other would set London on fire. The letter had no signature. But the wax had a second impression hidden beneath the lion, a mark only the very foolish or the very brave would recognize. It was not the Duke's crest. It was something older, something that did not forgive. Laura pressed her palm to the secret seal. The rosemary fragrance clung to her gloves. A riddle formed in her mind like frost on glass. What name holds power when it refuses to be spoken? She would learn the answer at midnight. The winter garden waited behind Ashbourne House like a rumor trimmed in ivy. Frost clung to the ironwork. Lanterns burned low. Statues pretended not to listen. Roses slept under straw as if saving their scandal for spring. Midnight peeled open the sky. Carriage wheels murmured along the mews. A clock settled its last breath. Laura stepped through the side gate with careful courage. Red silk moved like flame made obedient. Her gown was empire cut with a scalloped lace hem. Her spencer was crimson velvet lined in cream. Her gloves were pearl white. Her reticule held only a folded prayer and a pin for emergencies. She had learned that hope needs tools. She crossed the gravel. She counted her steps to quiet her heart. 9 to the first arch. 7 to the sundial. 3 to the fountain where swans had once been carved to look kinder than swans are. A figure stood by the yew. Tall. Composed. Wrapped in a greatcoat the color of private storms. Not the Duke, not his way of standing. Not his habit of owning the ground beneath him. Lady Malvern stepped from the shadows with a smile dressed as sympathy. Her gown was black-watered silk. Her diamonds glared. 2 footmen waited at a distance like punctuation marks shaped as men. Power enjoys neat sentences. Laura held her chin steady. Politeness can be armor if you fasten it well. She greeted Lady Malvern with a voice that did not shake. The garden noticed. Lady Malvern praised the red gown as one might praise a fire that pretends it will not spread. She remarked that some girls mistake attention for affection. She remarked that some men mistake mercy for weakness. She spoke as if she had invented London. Laura asked about the letter. Lady Malvern admired the question. She suggested that mysteries are safer when left unsolved by the poor in reputation. She gestured toward the sealed envelope tucked in Laura's glove. There was hunger in the gesture. Footsteps entered the garden. The gravel changed its mind. Leonardo, Duke of Ashbourne, arrived with winter in his eyes and summer in his stride. A tailcoat of black superfine, a waistcoat of embroidered charcoal, a starched cravat that made silence feel underdressed. He wore the night like a fact. The footman backed away without being told. Lady Malvern's smile tightened into strategy. The Duke inclined his head to Laura first, then to danger. He had his priorities correct. He asked if the garden pleased her. No words were required. He asked by the angle of his hand and the courtesy in his gaze. She answered by breathing again. Sometimes that is enough. Lady Malvern announced that a certain young woman had begun to trespass in circles, where gratitude should have remained her favorite hobby. The Duke ignored the insult with elegant precision. He addressed Laura as if she were already owed respect by the century. He asked if she had been summoned or lured. Summoned is a favor, lured is a hunt. Laura lifted the letter. The wax glinted. The crest of the lion strangled by ivy caught the lantern light. The Duke's eyes sharpened to a blade. His jaw set to a verdict. He took the envelope and turned it under his thumb. A faint second impression lay beneath the lion. A serpent in a circle, tail in mouth, older than any title, older than patience. Lady Malvern watched the recognition arrive like dawn she did not command. She told the Duke that some debts prefer the dark. She told Laura that some smiles prefer to lie. The air cooled. The Duke dismissed the footman with a glance. He stepped closer to Laura, not touching yet touching the air around her until it felt less dangerous. He asked if she trusted him. He asked with the quiet that men use when they finally wish to deserve the answer. She nodded once. Trust is a door that opens a fraction or not at all. He offered his arm. She took it. The garden inhaled. They moved beneath the arch where frost traced lace on stone. Lady Malvern followed with the confidence of a woman who believes every story must pay her a tax. The Duke spoke softly of the mark hidden in the seal. He said it belonged to an old society that wore charity on its sleeve and control like a second skeleton. He said their pledges were written in whispers and ruin. He said they had tried to buy him when he was young enough to misunderstand the price. He had declined. They do not forgive declined. Laura felt the letter weigh more than paper. She asked why she had been called. The Duke's gaze folded into concern that looked almost like tenderness and therefore caused alarm in anyone who might be watching. He said the society favored bait that looked like kindness. He said they favored faces with honest eyes. Lady Malvern praised the Duke's memory as if it were adorable that he remembered anything beyond himself. She told Laura that secrecy is a kind of elegance. She told the Duke that defiance is a kind of poverty. The lantern flame trembled. A distant bell marked the quarter. Snow began to think about becoming snow. The city slept with one ear open. The Duke reached into his coat and produced a card bearing only a number and a rule. When in danger, stand where you can be seen by everyone who matters. He tucked the card into Laura's reticule beside the pin and the prayer. He met her eyes with a look that promised competence, then promised something unnameable. He asked her a riddle that did not sound like a riddle. What breaks a trap without breaking the one inside it? Her hand found the rosemary sprig she had pressed in a book at home. The answer arrived like a memory of warmth. Light. Always light. They stepped into the lantern glow. Lady Malvern's smile dimmed as if insulted by illumination. The Duke invited Laura to attend the winter ball at Ashbourne House the following evening. He said the charity auction planned for midnight would raise funds for orphans of the dockyards. He said he would require her help with a lot no one had yet seen. He asked without asking. He commanded without humiliation. Laura felt the old corset of rejection loosen another stitch. She agreed. Her voice carried like a bell that finally found its tower. Lady Malvern applauded the courage while calculating its cost. She warned that the ton enjoys watching generosity turn to scandal. She warned that midnight often arrives with invoices. The Duke thanked Lady Malvern with a politeness that meant war. He told her the garden had given them enough cold for one evening. He offered Laura his arm again. They walked to the gate in a silence that did not feel empty. At the gate he paused. He spoke in a tone that could pass for instruction and almost passed for hope. He said the ballroom would be crowded with eyes and rumors. He said the first dance would decide the rest of the night. He said he would find her by the scarlet threads. She understood. He watched her carriage vanish into the sleep of streets that remember better days. He turned back to the garden and to Lady Malvern, who waited like a debt with good posture. He told her he would host the society's emissary at the ball. He told her the seal had been read. He told her the trap would be shown the light. Lady Malvern curtsied as if dragged by gravity she did not respect. She said the emissary already walks your halls. She said you set the stage. We write the play. Snow at last decided to become snow. It landed on his shoulders and refused to melt. He did not brush it away. He let winter claim what it could. Across town, Laura leaned her forehead to the carriage glass. London moved past like a prayer said too quickly. She closed her eyes and saw a serpent in a circle, She opened them and saw only her reflection and the faint trace of a tear that refused to fall. What name holds power when it refuses to be spoken? The riddle rang again. She answered in her heart with a single stubborn word. Mine. The carriage turned the corner. The street lamps blinked. A shadow detached from a doorway and followed, patient as old vows. The emissary did not need an invitation. He already had the key. The invitation arrived the next morning, sealed in silver wax and smelling faintly of cedar. Lady Helena received hers first, of course. She shrieked as though the Queen herself had offered to share a pastry. The name Miss Laura Whitcomb printed beneath hers felt like a mistake London would spend the day discussing. Servants fluttered. Helena rehearsed humility until it gleamed. Laura remained silent. Her red dress hung near the window, sunlight tracing its stubborn thread. She told herself it was just a garment, not a declaration. The lie did not hold. By dusk, carriages lined Grosvenor Square like soldiers dressed for temptation. Ashbourne House glowed with chandeliers that had never known restraint. Inside, violins tangled with gossip. Perfume and secrets shared the same air. The season's elite performed their ritual, adoration of themselves while pretending to admire others. Laura stepped into the ballroom alone. Her gown, scarlet satin trimmed with cream lace, drew every whisper into orbit. A duchess in emerald muttered that red was a color of desperation. A viscount's daughter sighed that courage and foolishness often wear the same shade. Laura smiled, and by doing so proved both right. Across the marble floor, the Duke of Ashbourne watched from the head of the staircase. He had changed nothing about himself except the expression. Tonight he wore intent. The orchestra faltered for half a heartbeat when he began to descend. He greeted no one. He bowed to no one. He walked through London's brightest illusions as though they were smoke. Every mother's ambition turned its head. Every rival's jaw tensed. Every candle leaned forward. Laura tried to look anywhere but at him. She failed. The human heart has a cruel sense of timing. When he stopped before her, the room forgot to breathe. He extended his hand. No introduction. No request. Just command disguised as courtesy. She placed her gloved fingers in his. The waltz began. The crowd murmured in disbelief as they moved, her scarlet against his black, her softness against his discipline. Each turn redrew the map of reputation. Each step carried a rumor. By the second rotation, the whispers had names. Lady Malvern, watching from the gallery, smiled like a general who recognizes both sides will bleed. The Duke leaned close enough that only Laura could hear. He said she had kept her promise. He said the serpent's mark had not been meant for her, but for him. He said they were being watched. She kept dancing. He asked her quietly to play along. She asked what the game was. He said it was survival dressed as charity. Her laugh was soft and dangerous. She told him she had practiced both. A turn, a dip, a moment too long before he let her rise. The Duchess of Brimley gasped, which meant half of London gasped. The scandal was officially baptized. As the final chord fell, applause broke like thunder disguised as politeness. The Duke bowed slightly. Laura curtsied, cheeks flushed with borrowed courage. When she lifted her eyes, she saw the flash of silver at the far end of the hall, an insignia in the shape of a serpent biting its tail, pinned to the lapel of a man she did not recognize. The emissary. He watched her the way collectors study fragile art, appreciation mixed with ownership. She turned back toward the Duke, but he was already moving toward the dais where the charity auction would begin. Lot 1, a portrait of the late Duchess of Ashbourne. Lot 2, a sapphire necklace with an unspoken curse. Lot 3, to be announced. The Duke took the stage with calm precision. He thanked the guests for their generosity. He thanked London for its endless supply of intrigue. He announced that Lot 3 would be presented by a lady whose compassion had caught his attention. He extended his hand toward Laura. Her pulse became thunder and silk. The crowd shifted, curious, hungry. Helena nearly dropped her fan. Lady Malvern hid her satisfaction behind it. Laura climbed the steps, every movement balanced between fear and defiance. The Duke handed her a small velvet box. Inside rested the rosemary sprig from the market, now encased in crystal. He told the room it symbolized kindness, a virtue too rare to auction and too fragile to ignore. He announced children of the Thames docks. Applause rose, slow and confused, then genuine. Laura met his gaze. She saw pride there, and warning. As the crowd clapped, The emissary leaned toward Lady Malvern and whispered something that made her diamond earrings tremble. The night should have ended in triumph. It did not. When the orchestra began the next waltz, the Duke's steward hurried to his side, pale as marble. He whispered 3 words that turned the Duke's expression to iron. The emissary was gone, and in his place, left on a silver tray beside the sapphire necklace, lay a folded card bearing only a sentence in elegant, merciless ink. "The serpent has already entered your house." Laura saw the Duke's jaw tighten. He looked at her once, sharp, searching, protective. He reached for the card, slipped it into his coat, and offered her a smile meant to calm a storm. It failed. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. Inside, the ton murmured new theories. A Duke, a red dress, a vanishing guest. London's favorite meal, rumor, had just been served. The orchestra swelled again, pretending the world had not changed. Laura stood at the edge of the dance floor, heart racing, the scent of rosemary haunting the air. Somewhere in the crowd, unseen eyes watched her and waited. The serpent's mark glowed faintly beneath the candlelight. The game had begun. Snow powdered the streets like forgotten confetti. The city slept, but Ashbourne House did not. Servants whispered in corners. Guards checked the windows twice. Somewhere in the east wing, a candle burned where it should not. The Duke stood alone in his study. Maps, letters, and wax seals covered the desk like evidence of too many lives. He had removed his cravat. His waistcoat hung open, rebellion disguised as fatigue. The serpent's note lay beside a half-empty glass of brandy. "The serpent has already entered your house." He read the words again. Not threat statement. Not handwriting he recognized. Yet the ink bled with memory. Someone who knew where to wound. He thought of the red gown, the fragile defiance, the tears she never allowed to fall. He thought of Laura. How swiftly an innocent heart becomes collateral in someone else's war. He told himself he would protect her because it was his duty. He lied to himself with practiced skill. A soft knock broke the silence. He did not turn. He knew that hesitation. It belonged to someone who wanted to be brave and did not yet believe she could. Laura stepped into the light. Her cloak dripped melted snow onto the Persian rug. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold. Her eyes from something else entirely. She said she had been followed. 2 figures near the carriage. A shadow at every corner. She had come because she refused to hide. She had come because fear loses power when faced directly. The Duke told her she should have stayed home. She told him home was the loneliest word in her vocabulary. He almost smiled. Almost. He poured her tea himself, scandalous enough for 3 newspapers. The china rattled once in his hand before he steadied it. He asked if she trusted him. She said she wanted to. He said wanting is how trust begins. A gust of wind rattled the shutters. The fire leaned forward as though listening. He told her the truth, or part of it. The serpent mark belonged to a secret circle of nobles who trafficked influence and ruin in equal measure. They called themselves the Ivy Order. They promised order but delivered control. He had refused their alliance years ago, and they had not forgotten. Laura listened, silent as prayer. He said the order believed compassion was weakness. She asked if that was why they hated him. He said it was why they feared him. She stepped closer to the desk. Her reflection wavered in the crystal paperweight shaped like a teardrop. She said someone had slipped another letter into her carriage tonight. He took it from her glove, broke the seal, and read aloud. "The Duchess you replace already knew the truth. Will you?" The words fell like ice. Laura blinked. Replace. The ballroom portrait. The crystal rosemary. The whispers that never quite died. She asked what they meant. He said the late Duchess had died in a carriage accident 3 winters ago. He said the case was closed. He said that even lies were mourning veils. He said too much. Laura asked if he had loved her. He answered by looking away. She understood. The truth often hides behind good posture. Outside, hooves struck the cobblestones. A carriage door slammed. Voices rose in panic. The Duke moved to the window and froze. Across the courtyard, flames leapt from the west stables, violent, deliberate, hungry. Guards shouted. Horses screamed. The order had made its introduction. He turned to Laura. "Stay here." She shook her head. "No." Before he could argue, she grabbed a blanket from the sofa and ran toward the corridor. Her courage was madness, her madness contagious. He followed. The night broke open in chaos. Servants raced with buckets. Ash fell like black snow. The Duke tore through the smoke, pulling reins, cutting ropes, freeing terrified animals. Laura coughed beside him, eyes burning, face streaked with soot. When at last the flames surrendered, the courtyard was ruin. Half the stable gone, one carriage melted to its bones. The same carriage that had carried her home hours before. The Duke's gaze found her through the smoke. He reached out, fingers trembling with something more than exhaustion. She stood shaking, the crimson gown now dark with ash. He whispered that he should have kept her away. She whispered that he had until tonight. For a heartbeat, the world held still. Then the bell tower struck 3. The sound carried through the frost like judgment. He stepped closer, hand brushing her cheek to wipe away soot. Her breath caught. For a man who owned half of London, he looked uncertain for the first time. He said, "They will come again." She said, "Then we will be ready." Her voice shook, but her eyes did not. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to forget everything else. Instead, he asked her the same riddle he had asked before. What breaks a trap without breaking the one inside it? She looked at the rising smoke and answered, "Love, if it's real enough." He closed his eyes, not because he doubted her answer, but because he knew how much it would cost. Somewhere behind them in the ruins of the stable, a silver emblem glimmered in the ashes, a serpent biting its tail, and beneath it, carved into the blackened wood, 3 words burned like prophecy: "The Duchess lives." The Duke turned pale. Laura stepped closer, whispering the question that would haunt them both. "If she lives, whose grave did we bury?" Dawn arrived wearing grief's color. Ashbourne House stood wounded but defiant, its smoke curling into a sky the shade of pewter. Servants whispered of curses. Neighbors whispered of scandal. London whispered of love. Laura awoke in a guest chamber she had not chosen. Her gown hung over a chair, its red dulled to wine. Her hands smelled faintly of smoke and rosemary. On the bedside table sat a single note written in the Duke's unmistakable hand. "You are safe. Do not wander. Trust no one who knocks before sunrise." She traced the words with her fingertips. They were command, apology, and protection all at once. A knock sounded immediately after. She froze. It was past sunrise, technically. The door opened without her permission. Helena swept in, wrapped in lavender silk and self-righteousness. Behind her trailed gossip like perfume. She began to speak before breathing. London had erupted overnight. The fire, the letter. The Duke and the red-dressed nobody caught in the stables at midnight. Laura had become the city's newest cautionary tale. Helena smiled the way only sisters can. Half pity, half poison. She asked if Laura finally understood the cost of pretending to belong. Laura said she had never pretended. That was the problem. Helena's eyes flashed. She mentioned the late Duchess. She mentioned whispers of madness and mirrors shattered in the West Wing. She mentioned that Laura's sudden closeness to the Duke might not be affection, but replacement. Laura felt the words like needles sewn beneath her skin. Helena curtsied mockingly and left, leaving the door ajar so the servants could finish the story she had started. Moments later, Jenkins, the Duke's steward, appeared. His usually unreadable face carried a crack of worry. He told her His Grace required her presence in the library. He warned her not to speak of what she had seen in the stables. He said, "It is not the dead we should fear, Miss Whitcomb. It is those who want them to stay that way." The library smelled of leather and secrets. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, dust turning to gold in the air. The Duke stood by the hearth, coat unbuttoned, eyes darker than the night before. He motioned for her to sit. She did not. He looked at her the way soldiers look at home after too many battles. He told her the impossible, that the body buried under the Duchess's name had been identified by a ring alone, that the physician who signed the death certificate vanished 2 weeks later, that someone had sent him a lock of hair last winter with a note that read, "She watches you from the ivy." Laura's pulse raced. She asked if he believed she was alive. He said belief was a luxury he could no longer afford. But fear was cheap and plentiful. He handed her the burned emblem retrieved from the stable floor. The serpent biting its tail gleamed faintly, half melted. On the back, an inscription she hadn't noticed before. "Only the chosen may shed the skin." He said it was the motto of the Ivy Order. She said it sounded like a warning. He said it was a promise. Before she could reply, the butler entered carrying a silver tray. A letter, it sealed with wax the color of dried blood. The Duke broke it open. "Tonight, the Ivy will gather at the opera. 1 seat left unclaimed. Wear red, no signature. Just the serpent mark pressed deep." Laura stepped back, but the Duke's gaze caught hers like a hand around her wrist. He told her she would attend. She told him he was mad. He said madness was sometimes strategy wearing better clothes. He explained that the order believed in spectacle. They fed on fear and fascination. If they wanted her in red, they wanted the world watching. He intended to let them. He would attend as her silent escort, unseen in the shadows of the private boxes. He would find the emissary. He would end this. Laura said, "You speak as if it's war." He said, "It is, and you are already on the battlefield." Evening came too soon. The opera house shone like sin baptized in candlelight. Carriages lined the street, their wheels slick with melting snow. Inside, chandeliers trembled under the weight of gossip. Eyes turned as Laura entered in crimson silk that shimmered with every breath. Helena was there, whispering into Lady Malvern's ear. The same serpent pin glittered on Lady Malvern's bodice. Laura's chest tightened. The enemy had been in the ballroom all along. From the upper box she felt his gaze, steady, protective, dangerous. The Duke watched her, his gloved hand resting on the hilt of something hidden beneath his coat. The orchestra began. Music soared. Curtains rose, but the true performance had already begun. Between the arias and applause, envelopes passed from one gloved hand to another. A coded ballet. Laura sat perfectly still, pretending to admire the stage while her pulse composed its own symphony. Then during the final act, a masked man slipped into the empty seat beside her. He smelled of cedar and smoke. He whispered, "Do you still dream of the garden?" Her blood froze. That voice, familiar, terrible. The Duke's head turned sharply from the shadows above, recognizing it too late. The masked man leaned closer. His ring caught the candlelight. "The same crest, the strangled lion?" He whispered again, softer this time. "The Duchess lives because you took her place." Laura gasped. The Duke was already moving through the crowd below, forcing his way toward her. But the masked man stood, melted into the applause, and disappeared through the golden curtains. Only a single black glove remained on the chair beside her. Embroidered on the palm was a serpent in silver thread, and beneath it, a single word stitched by hand. Return. The opera erupted in clapping, blind to the danger in their midst. The Duke reached her seconds later, took her trembling hands, and whispered, "He's not warning us. He's inviting us." And from somewhere deep beneath the stage, faint and deliberate, came the sound of a woman's laughter. Cold, elegant, and unmistakably alive. The laughter echoed long after the opera ended. It drifted through the corridors like perfume that refused to fade. The audience filed out into the snow, unaware that history had just shifted its weight. Laura stood trembling in the Duke's carriage, her gloved hands clenched in her lap. The world outside moved like a dream she no longer trusted. He sat across from her, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor. The silence between them had its own pulse. Finally she spoke. "The Duchess lives." He didn't deny it. He said her name once quietly, as if it were a confession. Eveline. He told her Eveline had been brilliant, adored, and terrifying in equal measure. She had wanted to rule the ton from behind her fan. He had wanted peace. They had married for duty, not love. And somewhere between expectation and resentment she had vanished. Her carriage overturned on the Dover road. Body burned, ring intact. Now he said he understood the cruelty of convenience. Laura listened, heart breaking in unfamiliar directions. She asked if Eveline was part of the Ivy Order. He said no, she was the Ivy Order. The serpent mark had been her design. She had promised him freedom, then turned freedom into debt. He had spent years paying in silence. The carriage rattled over the bridge. The Thames glimmered below, dark as ink. Laura turned to the window. A shadow followed on horseback, keeping distance yet never falling behind. He saw it too. They both did. Neither spoke. When they reached Ashbourne House, the lamps were lit, but the servants were gone. Every door stood ajar. Every hallway hummed with warning. The Duke drew his pistol from beneath his coat. Laura took the small dagger he offered without argument. Trust had become a fragile but necessary habit. They moved through the grand foyer in silence. Portraits stared down, alive with disapproval. At the far end of the hall, the drawing-room door was cracked open. Light spilled through it, flickering like candlelight over water. Inside, a fire burned low in the grate, and in front of it, seated in the late Duchess's chair, was a woman in black silk. Her hair was pale gold, coiled perfectly, her posture flawless, her presence unbearable. Eveline. alive, unchanged, except for the eyes, cooler now, as if winter had taken residence behind them. Laura froze. The Duke stopped breathing. Evelyn rose with grace that could have been rehearsed. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile London built temples around. She said, "My love, you've redecorated." How thoughtful. Her voice carried the same laughter they had heard beneath the opera stage. He said her name again, half in disbelief, half in mourning. She told him not to waste it. It had cost him enough already. Laura's knees weakened. The Duchess, no, the ghost, walked closer, studying her. She tilted her head, as though examining a portrait that had been poorly copied. "So this is the replacement," she murmured. "Red suits you. It always suited me, too." Laura's voice broke. "Why fake your death?" Evelyn's smile sharpened. "Because London loves a resurrection more than a tragedy." The Duke stepped between them. He demanded to know what she wanted. She looked at him, then at Laura, and said, "Justice, and the end of pretending." She circled the room slowly, her gloved fingers trailing across the mantel. The serpent emblem glinted on her wrist. She said the Ivy Order was never meant for corruption. It had been her attempt to protect women like herself, clever, trapped, discarded. But power is a beast that eats its keeper. When he refused to lead beside her, they took everything. Her name, her safety, her freedom. Now she had returned to reclaim them. Laura whispered, "By burning his house?" Evelyn turned, eyes flashing. "By cleansing it." The Duke raised the pistol. Her laughter came again, soft this time, almost sad. "You would shoot the only woman who ever told you the truth?" He said he would shoot the one who hurt the woman he now loved. Silence. Laura looked up, startled by the words, and saw Evelyn's face flicker, one heartbeat of genuine pain. Evelyn stepped closer until the barrel touched her corset. "Then do it," she said. "But if you pull the trigger, you'll never learn what I know." He hesitated. She smiled. She always knew he would. She leaned in, whispering something only he could hear. His expression changed, shock, disbelief, then fury. Before he could react, she pressed a small vial into his hand. "The truth is never clean," she said. "You'll need this to see it." She turned to Laura. "He thinks love will save him. It won't, it never does." Then she vanished through the servants' passage, leaving cold air and the smell of smoke behind. The Duke looked down at the vial. Inside swirled a dark, iridescent liquid that shimmered like oil. He said it was marked with the same serpent seal. He said it wasn't poison, it was memory, something the Order had created to force the mind to relive what was hidden, something only a fool or a desperate man would drink. He unstoppered it. Laura reached for his hand. He looked at her once, as if memorizing the light on her face, and drank. He gasped, then fell to his knees. Laura caught him before he hit the floor. His eyes went distant, unfocused, as if seeing through time itself. He whispered one name before slipping into unconsciousness. Thomas. The name meant nothing to her yet, but somewhere deep in the mansion, behind locked doors and portraits that whispered, someone else had heard it, and smiled. The Duke's past had awakened, and the Ivy Order was far from finished. The clock struck 2 as the Duke collapsed against the floor. The fire in the grate dimmed, as if afraid of what it might reveal. Laura knelt beside him, hands trembling, whispering prayers she barely remembered. His pulse beat faintly beneath her fingertips. His eyes moved beneath closed lids, trapped in some private war. She called his name once, then again softer. No response. The vial rolled across the carpet, spilling the last drop of its shimmering liquid. It soaked into the fibers like a secret unwilling to stay hidden. For a moment the house seemed to breathe. Then the portraits on the walls creaked, the candles flickered, and a low hum filled the air. Jenkins rushed into the room, pale and breathless. He froze when he saw his master on the floor. He asked what had happened. Laura said the truth in the simplest way possible. He drank what he should not have. Jenkins knelt, eyes wide. He said no one survived the Order's elixirs. They were made to destroy the mind or unlock it completely. He did not know which fate was worse. Laura pressed a hand to the Duke's forehead. He was burning, yet shivering as if drowning in snow. His lips moved. One word escaped, quiet as ash. Thomas. She looked at Jenkins. "Who is Thomas?" The steward swallowed hard before answering. He was the Duke's younger brother. Dead these 15 years. The silence after that was thick enough to touch. Urged her to leave the house at once. He said if the Duchess had truly returned, no wall in London would keep her out. Laura refused. She would not abandon the man who had seen her when no one else dared. If Eveline had brought war, then war would find her ready. They carried the Duke to his chamber. Servants whispered and crossed themselves. Laura dismissed them all. She sat by his bed, watching his face twist in fevered dreams. Each breath sounded like confession, each pause like judgment. She dipped a cloth in cool water and brushed it across his brow. He flinched. Then suddenly his hand caught her wrist. His eyes opened, unfocused, distant, as if seeing two worlds at once. He spoke, voice rough and broken. They lied to me. They buried the wrong one. The carriage was meant for Thomas. Laura froze. His gaze wandered beyond her. I saw her in the flames. She wasn't screaming. She was smiling. He fell silent again, his hand slipping from hers. She sat back, heart pounding. Pieces of truth scattered through her thoughts like shards of glass. If the Duchess had faked her death, who had taken her place in the carriage? If Thomas had been the target, what did that mean for the Duke? And why, after all these years, was the order stirring again? She did not sleep. Dawn crept through the windows, pale and nervous. When the Duke finally stirred, she was still there, eyes red, gown wrinkled, courage intact. He woke slowly, disoriented, searching the room as if expecting ghosts. When his gaze found her, something in him softened. He whispered her name like an apology. She asked what he had seen. He hesitated. Then he said it plainly. A memory, not of death, of betrayal. He remembered a night 15 years ago, a fire in the family chapel, Eveline's voice through the smoke, and Thomas kneeling before the serpent altar, bound and silent. The order had demanded loyalty sealed in blood. Thomas had refused. Eveline had not. The Duke had tried to stop it. But the flames had already chosen their price. Laura sat in silence. He said he had carried that guilt every day since, believing his brother died by accident. Now he knew better. The carriage, the fire, the letters, all threads in the same web. He turned to her, eyes hollow but steady. He said Eveline wanted him alive because she needed an heir to legitimize her power. The Ivy Order could not operate without a Duke at its head, and he was the last Ashbourne left. Laura asked what Eveline would do next. He said she would return to the ballroom, not to dance but to conquer. Tonight was the Duchess of Briar Hill's masquerade. Half the order would be there, and Eveline loved audiences. He rose from the bed, still weak, still burning with fever. Laura tried to stop him. He caught her hand instead. He said if she truly wished to help him, she must be braver than she had ever been. She must wear the serpent's colors and walk into the lion's den. She asked if he trusted her that much. He said he trusted no one that much. Then softer, that he wanted to. They stood there for a long moment, the air between them heavy with unspoken things. Outside, carriages began to rattle again through the streets of London, carrying invitations and intentions. The city was waking, unaware that before the next sunrise its most powerful secret might finally burn. Laura looked out the window. Snow was falling again, quiet and deceptive. She whispered to herself the riddle that had followed them since the market. What name holds power when it refuses to be spoken? Her answer came without hesitation now. Not love, not fear. Faith. She turned back to the Duke. Then, let us begin. And far away in the catacombs beneath Briar Hill Hall, Eveline Ashbourne placed a mask over her face, smiled at her reflection, and whispered the words that would set London aflame. Let the masquerade begin. Night descended upon London with a beauty too sharp to touch. The streets glittered with frost, carriages shone like obsidian, and every whisper carried the scent of expectation. No one in the city slept when Briar Hill Hall opened its golden doors. The masquerade was the event of the season. 1,000 candles shimmered in mirrored halls. Violins trembled under chandeliers heavy enough to crush a secret. Laughter, perfume, and deceit drifted together in perfect harmony. Laura stood at the top of the grand staircase wearing the colors of sin and salvation, a crimson gown embroidered with black ivy, pearls at her throat, a mask of gold lace that did nothing to hide the courage in her eyes. Every detail had been chosen to mock the order she had come to face. The Duke had insisted she go ahead of him. He would arrive unseen, hidden behind a merchant's disguise. She had argued, but he had won, as men of his rank so often did. Still, she had made one condition. He would not decide how the story ended. She would. Music swelled and heads turned. Helena was already there, radiant in white satin. whispering her way into the company of Lady Malvern and two masked lords with serpent rings. When Helena's gaze found Laura at the staircase, it faltered for half a heartbeat before twisting into a smile sharp enough to draw blood. The guests parted for Laura as if she carried contagion. Perhaps she did. Truth has always been infectious. A gentleman in a silver mask approached and bowed. He offered his hand. She accepted, though her pulse protested. His voice, smooth and precise, carried a hint of recognition. He said the color red was dangerous at a gathering like this. She said danger had been her chaperone all week. They danced. The room moved in slow spirals of silk and deception. Each turn revealed another serpent pin, another familiar face behind painted masks. The Ivy Order had come out to feast. The stranger leaned closer. He asked if she knew why the Order chose the serpent. She said she assumed it was for its poison. He smiled. No, for its patience. She looked into his eyes then, green, glacial, deliberate, and her breath caught. He was not a stranger. He was the emissary from the opera. The same voice that had whispered of gardens and ghosts. Her hand tensed in his. He noticed. He whispered that she had been brave, and bravery often ends in burial. Before she could reply, the music stopped. The crowd parted as Eveline entered. Draped in black velvet and shadow, her mask was simple, half lace, half scar. Every head bowed as if pulled by gravity. Every rumor became silence. The Duchess raised a gloved hand and the orchestra froze mid-note. Her voice carried easily through the hall. She thanked her guests for attending what she called the rebirth of London's true order. Tonight, she said, the mask of hypocrisy would be removed. Tonight, bloodlines would be rewritten. Laura felt her stomach twist. Eveline's gaze swept the crowd until it found her. Their eyes met like the collision of mirrors. The Duchess smiled. Ah, she said, there you are, the girl who wears my colors. Laughter rippled through the room. Helena looked away, pretending to fan herself. The emissary released Laura's hand and stepped back into the sea of masks. Eveline descended the stairs slowly, like a queen accepting her own coronation. When she reached the marble floor, she gestured toward Laura. Come forward. Laura obeyed. The room pulsed with anticipation. The Duchess circled her once, studying the embroidery on her gown. Beautiful work, Eveline murmured. Almost as though you were born to wear it. Laura's heart pounded. She said she had not come to model dresses, but to seek answers. Eveline's smile widened. Then you've chosen the right party. She raised her hand again. From the far balcony, curtains parted. Two guards emerged, dragging a heavy chest bound in iron. The sound of metal against marble silenced even the violins. Eveline announced that inside lay the truth about the Ashbourne family. A truth that had been buried in the chapel fire 15 years ago. And tonight it would be shown to all. Laura looked toward the door where the Duke should have appeared by now. Nothing, only the echo of her own fear. Eveline gestured and the chest was unlocked. The lid creaked open, revealing a single object, a signet ring identical to the Duke's, crusted in ash. Gasps filled the hall. Eveline's voice hardened. You all believed the younger brother Thomas died in that fire, but ashes do not always tell the truth. She pointed to Laura. Tell me, my dear, do you know whose ring this is? Laura hesitated. Eveline's tone turned colder. It belongs to the man who betrayed us all. The man who tried to destroy the order from within. The man you now call your Duke. A murmur spread through the room like smoke. Eveline raised her arms as if conducting the chaos. She declared that Leonardo Ashbourne was no Duke at all, but a murderer protected by his own lies. That he had sacrificed his brother to claim the title. Laura's voice broke through the noise. Liar. The word cracked like thunder. The Duchess turned, eyes gleaming with victory. Liar, Laura repeated louder. If he killed his brother, why did you save him? Why send him the potion? Why return now? The question struck its mark. For the first time, Eveline hesitated. The crowd leaned forward like a single living thing. Then, before anyone could breathe, the great doors of Briar Hill Hall burst open. Wind and snow swept through the ballroom. And standing in the threshold, coat dark with frost, eyes blazing with fury, was the Duke of Ashbourne. He said nothing. He simply walked toward the center of the room, every footstep erasing a lie. When he stopped beside Laura, the crowd fell silent again. Eveline's smile returned, but her voice trembled. You should have stayed dead, she said. He looked at her and Ripley storm outside. The masquerade had ended. What came next would be reckoning. The ballroom held its breath. Snow drifted through the open doors, melting against the marble like pearls dissolving in milk. The Duke stood beneath the chandeliers, his face pale but resolute, his coat torn from the struggle to reach the hall. Every mask in the room had turned toward him. Every lie had run out of places to hide. Eveline did not move. Her black gown shimmered like oil under the candlelight. Her gloved fingers curled around the serpent emblem at her throat. Her voice was calm when she finally spoke. So the ghost learned to walk again. The Duke said he had walked through worse. Through fire. Through loss. Through years of guilt that she had written for him. The crowd stirred, 1,000 whispers colliding. Laura stood beside him, her hand trembling but steady enough to find his. He did not look at her, but he did not let go. She could feel the beat of his pulse, wild and human and defiant. Eveline lifted the ring from the chest and held it high. She declared that this was the proof of his crime. That 15 years ago, Leonardo Ashbourne had set fire to his own family chapel to kill his brother and inherit the title. The guests gasped as though scandal were oxygen. The Duke's voice cut through the noise, low and certain. You always loved rewriting the story. You were there that night. You know who lit the flame. Eveline's expression flickered. For an instant, the room saw the truth behind her perfection. Then she smiled again, sharper than glass. If you are innocent, prove it. The Duke stepped forward. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden box, scorched along one edge. He placed it on the chest beside the ring. Jenkins had found it buried in the ashes of the stable days before. He opened it slowly. Inside lay a lock of hair tied with a ribbon and a letter sealed with the serpent crest. The seal broke easily as if eager to speak. He read the words aloud, voice steady. To whoever finds this, know that I am the one who betrayed the Ashbourne blood. I sought power promised by the Ivy, and they asked a price I could not pay. I took my brother's name. I burned the chapel to erase the debt. Forgive me, Eveline. Gasps filled the hall. Helena dropped her fan. Lady Malvern's diamonds caught the light like eyes widening in fear. Eveline's face went white, then red. She shouted that the letter was false, forged, planted. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Several in the crowd knew it from her endless invitations and notes. The air shifted. The room that once bowed to her now began to step away. Laura looked at her and saw something terrible. The crack in a woman who had built her world on elegance and deceit. Eveline's hand went to her corset, trembling. Her other hand slipped into her sleeve. A glint of metal appeared. The small pistol gleamed in the candlelight. Screams erupted as she raised it toward the Duke. He did not move. Laura did. She stepped between them without thinking, her red gown like a flame against the black. Eveline's voice broke. You took everything from me, Laura said softly. You gave it away yourself. The shot thundered through the hall. Glass shattered. Candles guttered out. For a moment, no one breathed. Laura stood still, eyes wide, her hand pressed to her chest. Then the Duke's arms were around her, pulling her close. The bullet had missed by a whisper, grazing the lace. Guards rushed forward. The crowd scattered. Eveline stood frozen, her weapon trembling, her perfect poise unraveling thread by thread. When the pistol fell from her hand, the sound was small, almost delicate. She whispered something no one but the Duke could hear. Then she turned, walked toward the open doors, and stepped into the snow. No one followed. Her black figure disappeared into the white, and with her, the last illusion of control. Laura leaned against him, shaking. He held her as if anchoring both of them to the world. The ring and the letter lay on the chest, undeniable, exposed under the flickering light. Helena approached quietly, face pale, eyes full of confusion and fear. She asked if it was over. Laura looked at her sister and said the truest words she could find. No, it has only begun. Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering the footprints of the woman who had once been Duchess. Inside, the Duke turned to Laura and whispered the only promise that mattered. Whatever comes next, we face it together. She nodded, tears mixing with ash on her cheeks. The music of the masquerade had died, but the sound of redemption had begun, soft, unsteady, and entirely human. Far across London, in an abandoned chapel where ivy crept through cracked stone, a single candle flickered to life. Beside it lay a serpent emblem and a new letter sealed in fresh wax. The handwriting was elegant, and the words patient. The ivy grows again. The fire at Briar Hill Hall burned through the night, leaving behind the scent of smoke, melted wax, and endings that refused to stay ended. By dawn, the ballroom was silent except for the soft echo of boots on marble. Guards had been posted. Guests had vanished. The last of the masks lay trampled on the floor, as if the city itself had grown tired of pretending. Laura stood near the window, the faint light painting her red gown a deep shade of wine. The Duke was beside her, coat draped over his shoulders, exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. Neither spoke for a long while. Silence had become their language. Outside, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. Carriages rolled through the frost. Church bells rang with hollow optimism. Somewhere a new scandal was already being born. London had a short memory for tragedy and a long appetite for gossip. At last the Duke turned toward her. His voice was quiet, almost afraid of its own sound. He said the order would not stop, that Eveline's disappearance was not defeat but strategy. The ivy had lived in whispers for centuries. It would take more than one night to uproot it. Laura nodded. Her hands still trembled, though not from fear. Something else lived beneath her ribs now. Resolve. Purpose. The kind of courage that grows only after the worst has happened. She asked what the letter meant. The one found in the chapel ruins. He said it was written before the fire. He said Eveline must have realized the order was using her, and tried to end it too late. He said guilt changes nothing but the shape of pain. They left the ballroom together as dawn broke over the city. The streets glittered with ice, the air cold enough to preserve secrets. When they reached the carriage, the driver handed the Duke another envelope, unmarked, sealed in plain wax. No crest, no emblem, only a single line inside. One root cut does not kill the vine. Laura read the words aloud. The Duke's jaw tightened. He crushed the paper and let it fall into the snow. Then he told her they would find every root, no matter how deep. Back at Ashbourne House, the servants moved quietly as though the walls could listen. The house had been rebuilt in part, but smoke still haunted its corners. The Duke ordered the hidden passages sealed. He burned the remaining documents bearing the serpent crest. When the last page turned to ash, he looked at her and said softly that he would never let darkness write their story again. She smiled faintly and told him that darkness could not write what light refused to forget. Days passed. The city returned to its rhythm of teas and titles, pretending nothing had changed. But behind the polished windows of Mayfair, fear had taken residence. The Ivy Order was wounded, not dead, and the serpent, when cornered, learns new ways to strike. One evening, while the snow fell thick outside, Jenkins entered the drawing room carrying a small parcel. No sender, no address. Inside lay a folded piece of silk embroidered with black ivy leaves. Wrapped inside it was a single white glove. On its palm, a small ruby in the shape of a tear. Laura stared at it. She asked what it meant. The Duke's eyes darkened. He said it meant Eveline was alive and waiting. That night, sleep refused to visit them. He sat by the fire, the flicker of flame tracing his scars. She sat across from him, watching the embers fade into silence. He asked if she regretted staying. She said regret belonged to those who never dared. He smiled for the first time in days. Then he took her hand. He said the world would talk, the order would rise again, and the truth would cost them both their peace. She said peace was overrated. Love, though fragile, was worth every scandal. He leaned closer. The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind softened, and for a moment London itself felt still, as if blessing what it could not understand. The fire dimmed to a glow, and in its light 2 shadows merged into one on the wall. It was not an ending. It was survival rewritten as devotion. But far beneath the city, where the forgotten catacombs stretched like veins under the cobblestones, a group of cloaked figures gathered by candlelight. Their leader placed a black seal on a parchment bearing a single name, Laura Whitcomb. The candle hissed and the wax dripped like blood. The leader's voice was calm, steady, certain. The ivy sleeps but does not die, and no flame burns forever. Above them, in a house built on ashes and hope, the Duke stirred from restless sleep, sensing what the earth already knew. The story was not over. It had only changed hands. Winter loosened its hold on London, leaving the city gray, damp, and restless. The Thames breathed mist each morning as though reluctant to wake. At Ashbourne House, silence had become both shield and burden. Laura walked the gardens that once smelled of rosemary and rain, now frost-old memory. The Duke had gone to Parliament that day, summoned to defend his estate against whispers of treason. London had a way of resurrecting ghosts for entertainment, and Eveline's name was once again on every tongue. Inside the house, Laura found Jenkins polishing silver that no one used. He avoided her eyes. Something was wrong. He handed her a folded newspaper, the ink still fresh. The headline spoke of a mysterious revival of an old society. The Ivy Order returns, 3 lords missing, 1 coat of arms burned into their doors. Laura read the lines twice, each word colder than the last. She asked where the Duke was. Jenkins said he had left with guards before sunrise, promising to return before nightfall. But evening was already bleeding across the sky. She waited in the study, pacing between shelves lined with history. Every creak of the floor sounded like a warning. When the wind knocked against the window panes, she nearly called his name. Then came the knock at the door. 3 slow raps, deliberate and familiar. Her heart stopped. It was the same rhythm that had once summoned her to the winter garden. She opened the door. No one stood there. Only a box wrapped in black ribbon, small enough to hold with one hand. Inside lay a silver serpent pin and a folded note on ivory parchment. He walks among them again. No signature, no explanation. But beneath the words was a smudge of ash, shaped almost like a fingerprint. Laura sank into the chair. The fire snapped, throwing restless shadows on the wall. She whispered his name as if it could summon him back. Nothing answered but the echo. Night deepened. The carriage finally arrived after midnight, wheels grinding against the frozen gravel. The Duke stepped out, pale, soaked by rain, his coat torn at the shoulder. His eyes found her immediately. He said nothing until he had closed the door behind him. He told her the truth as if confessing to the dark. The 3 missing lords had been members of Parliament secretly funding the Ivy's return. He had gone to confront them, only to find their homes already deserted. Each door marked with the serpent burned into wood, each house reeking of smoke and salt. The mark, he said, was not a warning. It was a claim. Laura showed him the box. His expression hardened. He said the message was clear. They were not only watching him now, they were inviting her. He walked to the fireplace and threw the pin into the flames. The metal hissed but did not melt. It twisted, reshaped itself in the heat, and when it cooled again, it lay in the shape of a heart pierced by a vine. She stared. He whispered that the Order had changed their emblem, that Eveline had found a new symbol for their rebirth, corruption disguised as love. Laura reached for his hand. He looked at her and said the words she feared most. She is building something larger than before. She wants you beside her, not as enemy, as heir. The room went silent. Even the fire dared not move. She asked why Eveline would choose her. He said because kindness draws followers faster than cruelty, and the Duchess had learned how to use other people's goodness as weapons. Laura turned toward the window, where fog pressed against the glass like breath. She asked what they should do. He said they must find the heart of the Order before spring, because by spring, the city would belong to it again. The clock struck 2. Outside, the mist thickened into something heavier, darker. When she looked closer, she saw shapes moving beyond the gates. Dozens of figures cloaked in gray, holding lanterns that glowed like dying stars. Each lifted an arm, revealing a silver serpent stitched into the sleeve. And from the fog rose a sound that chilled the air itself, a single unified voice chanting words she did not understand. The Duke grabbed his pistol, then stopped. He realized there were too many. He told her to go upstairs, to lock the chamber door and wait for his signal. She refused to leave him. He turned toward her with a softness that did not belong to fear. Then we faced them together. The chanting grew louder. The gates burst open. Lanterns swung like halos in the storm. The Order had come not to hide, but to reclaim what they believed was theirs. Laura's heart pounded as the first figure stepped into the courtyard. The hood fell back. Eveline's face appeared in the half-light, calm and unscarred, framed by falling rain. She smiled, serene as ever. "We meet again," her eyes seemed to say. And this time there was no ballroom, no music, no disguise, only the truth standing in the cold. Laura took the Duke's hand and whispered what she had known since the day they met at the market. "Kindness is not weakness." He nodded once. Then the door shuddered beneath the weight of the storm outside. The night swallowed the world in white and fire, and somewhere between fear and faith, 2 hearts prepared to decide how the story would end. The storm raged without mercy. Rain struck the windows like 1,000 fists. The gates of Ashbourne House hung open, their iron twisted by force or fate. Lanterns burned in the courtyard, their light trembling over dozens of faces hidden beneath gray hoods, and at their front stood Eveline, her calm smile a weapon sharper than steel. Laura and the Duke faced the door together. The fire behind them hissed and flared, painting the room in golden shadow. He held his pistol. She a single candle that refused to die even in the draft. Outside, the chanting grew rhythmic, almost holy. Each word echoed like a heartbeat the city could feel. The air thickened, pressing against the glass, against their ribs, against reason itself. Then silence, the kind of silence that only comes before disaster. A sound cracked through it. Wood splintering. The front doors gave way, and the order entered as one body, a river of gray pouring into the marble hall. Eveline stepped through the threshold first. Rain glistened on her lashes like tears that refused to fall. She looked around the room at the portraits, the smoke, the remnants of power. Then her gaze settled on them. Leonardo, she said without words, and yet he heard her. The man who once promised truth but built a kingdom of lies. The Duke lifted the pistol. Eveline did not flinch. Behind her, the hooded figures spread across the room, forming a circle around them. Laura stood firm, the candle steady in her hand, its flame catching in her reflection on the window pane. Eveline's eyes flickered to it, and something unreadable passed across her face. "You think light saves you," her expression seemed to say, "but light also blinds." Laura spoke first, her voice quiet but unshaken. "What do you want?" Eveline's lips curved slightly. "What was always mine? The truth? The name? The legacy?" She raised her hand, and the members of the order stepped forward, revealing a single object carried between them. A stone tablet, ancient, cracked, carved with the serpent eating its tail. The mark glowed faintly in the candlelight, alive and pulsing. The Duke frowned. He had seen it once in the ruins beneath the chapel. It was the heart of the order, the seal of binding that swore loyalty through generations. He realized too late what she meant to do. Eveline placed her hands on the stone. Her voice rose, low and melodic, words from a language that had not been spoken for centuries. The room seemed to tilt. The air thickened with heat and light. The portraits rattled on their hooks. The chandelier trembled. The Duke shouted her name, but the sound vanished into the roar. The order repeated the chant, their voices overlapping like waves colliding. Laura dropped the candle, the flame bending sideways but never going out. She reached for the Duke, their fingers barely touching. Then the stone cracked. A flash of white split the air. For a moment, everything stilled. Then the wind reversed, pulling the fire. The smoke even sound itself toward the tablet. The force lifted Eveline's hair like a halo. Her eyes glowed faintly, not from madness, but purpose. When the light faded, the hall was in ruin. Half the members lay motionless, the rest knelt as if struck by revelation. Eveline stood in the center, her black gown torn, her hands trembling. The serpent mark on the stone now burned with red fire. She looked at Laura and smiled faintly, as though recognizing something she had been waiting for. "It was never about him," she whispered without sound. "It was about you." Laura felt it before she understood it, a pulse beneath her skin, like heat traveling through her veins. The candle on the floor flared again, its flame burning white. Every eye turned toward her. The members began to bow their heads, whispering her name as if it were prayer. Eveline stepped closer, her strength fading with each breath. She touched Laura's hand, her palm warm and trembling. "The power in you was always mine to give, and yours to finish." Her knees gave way, the Duke catching her before she fell. She looked at him one last time, a ghost of sorrow softening her features. "Protect her," she said with her eyes, and then the last of her breath left with the storm. The Duke held her as the light dimmed. The chanting stopped. The stone split down the center with a sound like thunder breaking bone. The serpent symbol faded into dust. When silence returned, it was not the silence of death. It was the silence of something ending at last. Laura stood still, her candle still burning in her hand. The wax dripped over her fingers, hot, real, grounding her in the moment. She looked down at Eveline's body and felt neither victory nor relief, only understanding. Power, she realized, had never been the curse. It was the hunger for her mistake. She turned to the Duke. His face was pale, his eyes tired but clear. He said nothing. He didn't have to. Outside, the storm had ended. The air smelled of rain and earth and forgiveness. The first light of morning broke through the clouds, falling on the ruins of the serpent stone. The ivy carved into its edge had turned to ash. Laura bent down, took a fragment of the stone and placed it in her palm. The warmth from it was faint, like memory learning how to fade. She whispered that kindness had won, not power. The Duke took her hand, closing it gently around the shard. He said the city would heal as they would. that the order would be remembered not for its cruelty, but for how it was undone by mercy. They stepped outside together into the cold light. Snow covered the ground clean and new. For the first time in months, London was silent. And in that quiet, the last trace of the Ivy Order dissolved with the dawn, leaving behind only two hearts, one candle still burning, and a promise written not in power, but in peace. The story of the Duke and the girl in red would be told for generations. Some would call it tragedy, others redemption, but those who truly listened would understand it was never about loss or love alone. It was about light that refused to go out no matter how long the night. Spring came quietly that year. The frost melted, the river softened, and the air carried a sweetness that London had almost forgotten. Ashbourne House stood rebuilt, its windows open to light again. The walls no longer whispered of betrayal, only of survival. Laura walked through the garden at dawn, her fingers brushing against the new ivy climbing the stone walls. Not black, not cursed, just green and alive. Every leaf seemed to ask if she was ready to live without fear. She whispered yes, though her voice trembled as if learning the word for the first time. The Duke watched her from the terrace, his coat unbuttoned, his eyes lighter than before. He had learned to smile again, not for appearances, but because peace had finally found a home in him. When she turned and met his gaze, he walked down the steps toward her, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots. They met among the roses that had survived both fire and winter. He told her the city had begun to forget. The order had dissolved into rumor, the nobles who once whispered now fearful to speak its name. The serpent mark had not appeared again. London was healing, as were they. Laura said forgetting was mercy, but remembering was strength. She told him she still dreamed of Eveline sometimes, standing in the snow, not angry anymore, just tired. He said dreams often come to finish what words cannot. He reached for her hand, the gesture simple and human. He said he had written to the bishop, announcing his intention to rebuild the chapel that had burned so long ago. Not for penance, but for hope. She smiled and said hope had already been rebuilt here, among the living. The sun climbed higher, warm on their faces. She leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time, silence felt like safety instead of waiting. By midday, guests began to arrive for the small gathering she had planned. No nobles, no gossip, no politics, just the children from the orphanage she and the Duke had opened near the river. Laughter filled the garden where fear once lived. The sound was not grand, but it was enough. One of the children handed Laura a small wooden box. Inside lay the fragment of the serpent stone she had kept since that night. The surface, once rough and black, had turned pale and smooth like marble washed by rain. She placed it under the largest rose bush. Let this, she said, be the last root. Evening fell golden over the garden. The guests left slowly, carrying warmth instead of whispers. Laura and the Duke remained under the arbor, the light fading to amber. He asked what she would do now that the story was over. She said stories never end, they only change readers. He laughed softly, the sound carrying across the quiet fields. Later, when the stars emerged, they walked hand in hand through the house. The portraits no longer watched them with sorrow. The hall smelled of wax, tea, and roses. In the library, where everything had begun, a single candle burned on the desk. Its flame was small but steady. Laura stopped before it, remembering the night she had first held a candle against darkness. The same flame, the same heart, the same promise. She whispered gratitude for every lesson pain had taught her. The Duke came to stand behind her, his voice gentle in the stillness. He said love was not the reward for surviving, but the reason to begin again. She turned to him, her eyes bright with something more than light. He said he loved her, not as rescue, not as redemption, but as equal. She answered that she loved him for the same reason. Then the candle flickered, not out of fear but joy. Outside, the first fireflies of spring danced among the ivy. Each glow seemed to carry a memory, a name, a promise. Laura stepped onto the terrace, watching them drift over the dark garden. She felt the world breathe again, gentle and alive. The Duke joined her. He asked what she was thinking. She said that light, when shared, multiplies. He nodded, watching the glow spread across the night. And so London slept beneath a quiet sky. The city that had once thrived on scandal now dreamed of peace. Somewhere beyond its rooftops, the river whispered its endless song, carrying away what the world no longer needed to remember. In Ashbourne House, two hearts rested at last. No oaths, no shadows, no serpents. Only faith and the promise that even in the darkest stories, love always finds a way to write the final line. The candle in the library burned until dawn. When the morning light touched its flame, it did not vanish. It joined it. And the house, for the first time in years, was truly at peace. A year passed, and the memory of winter became a story London told in half-truths. The season returned brighter, softer, as though the city had forgiven itself for what it had been. Ashbourne House stood open once more, its doors no longer guarded by fear but by laughter. The Duke and Laura had grown used to quiet mornings. They took breakfast in the garden, where ivy now climbed harmlessly along the stone. The air smelled of roses and fresh bread. The world, for once, had chosen peace over spectacle. Laura sat at the long oak table, a sketchbook open before her. She drew faces she had seen in the orphanage, small smiles framed by unruly curls. Her art had become a way of praying without words. Each line was a memory preserved, each shadow a confession of love. The Duke joined her, his sleeves rolled, his expression unguarded. He had learned the art of living slowly. He no longer walked as a man defending a title, but as one protecting a life worth keeping. When he saw her sketches, he smiled, saying she had drawn joy the way others draw saints. She said joy needed witnesses more than worshippers. They spoke of travel, of places untouched by rumor. Perhaps Italy, where color seemed incapable of grief. Perhaps the Scottish coast, where silence was vast enough to hide even their story. But before they could decide, a messenger arrived on horseback, his coat marked with the royal seal. The letter was addressed to both of them. The Duke read it aloud by the fountain, his voice steady but wary. The Crown requested their presence at Westminster within the week. A new act was being drafted concerning ancient societies, their emblems and their surviving members. The ivy had not been forgotten. Laura closed her eyes. The past, it seemed, had found its way back again. The Duke folded the letter carefully. He said they would go, not as witnesses of guilt, but as proof that mercy could end what cruelty began. Days later, Westminster rose before them, solemn and gray under a soft rain. The chamber buzzed with hushed voices and the rustle of papers. When they entered, all sound softened. Every eye turned toward the woman once rumored to have been chosen by a secret order. Laura did not lower her gaze. They stood before the assembly. The Duke spoke first, not as noble, but as man. He told the story of how power, when worshipped, poisons even the purest intentions. He said the Ivy Order began with ideals but ended in hunger. He said its fall was not the end of faith, but a lesson that faith belongs to hearts, not hierarchies. Then Laura spoke, her voice calm and luminous in the high hall. She said there would always be those who built cages from ideas and called them purpose, that the only true strength was kindness chosen in the face of power, and that redemption, once begun, must be shared to survive. When she finished, the silence that followed was not polite but reverent. Even those who had doubted now understood. The bill passed that day. Every emblem of the Ivy Order was outlawed, its memory sealed in the archives of the realm. The serpent had finally been buried. When they left the hall, the sky broke open with sunlight. Rain shimmered on the cobblestones like glass. Laura lifted her face to the warmth, her smile soft as forgiveness. The Duke looked at her and thought of every moment that had brought them to this peace. They walked by the river on the way home. Children played on the banks, tossing pebbles that rippled outward in perfect circles. She stopped to watch them, her hand brushing his. He said they had come full circle too. She said circles were not prisons if one learned to dance inside them. Evening found them back at Ashbourne House. The fire burned low and the garden glowed with lanterns strung between trees. Laura sat at her desk and opened her journal, the same one she had once used to sketch sorrow. Now she wrote. She wrote of love that taught, of faith that survived ambition. She wrote that peace was not silence but choice. She wrote that kindness, when practiced, becomes legacy. When she finished, she set the pen aside. The Duke entered quietly, placing a rose on the table beside her. He said there were moments when words failed, and those moments were blessings. She nodded and leaned her head against his shoulder. The candlelight flickered across their faces. Outside, the ivy swayed softly in the breeze, alive but no longer threatening. The serpent had been replaced by the rose. Where there had once been ruin, there was now renewal. And though the city beyond their gates would forget names and rumors, some things would remain. The scent of rosemary after rain, the echo of laughter in quiet halls, the certainty that light once chosen could never truly be undone. As night deepened, the Duke whispered that tomorrow would be ordinary again. Laura smiled and said ordinary was the most miraculous thing she had ever wanted. And when the last candle burned to its wick, the two of them slept beneath the sound of the garden, dreaming not of serpents or shadows, but of a world finally free to bloom. In the morning, sunlight would fall through the window onto her journal, open to its final words. They read simply and truthfully, "Love won," and that was enough. The city had changed again. Carriages now rolled through wider streets, the air smelled of spring, and the gossip of the ton had found new names to wound. Time, as always, had moved forward without permission. Ashbourne House stood quieter, gentler. The ivy on its walls bloomed soft green instead of dark gray. Children's laughter often drifted from the gardens, where the orphanage Laura founded had grown into a haven for the forgotten. The Duke called it her second heart. She called it her true home. That morning she woke early. The light came through the tall windows like grace. She tied her hair with a simple ribbon, no jewels, no title. Outside, the bells of St. Paul's carried across the wind, calling the faithful, the tired, and the curious to prayer. The Duke found her in the library. He wore a dark coat, a book in his hand, and the same look he had worn the first day he saw her in the market years ago. A mixture of awe and disbelief that something so good could still exist. He placed the book on the table, open to a single page. It was his handwriting, careful but human, to my Laura, who turned survival into light. She smiled and ran her fingers over the ink, as though it were something living. He said he had decided to publish the truth, not as scandal or confession, but as warning. The Ivy Order, the Duchess, the fire, and the night the city nearly lost its soul. He had written it all. He wanted the world to remember what power without compassion could do. She said truth without love becomes cruelty. He said love without truth becomes blindness. Together they had found the middle ground. The book was printed that summer. It was read in drawing rooms and universities, in quiet corners of churches and loud taverns by candlelight. It carried no noble title, only a name that few recognized. Leonard and L. Whitcomb. It became the story of redemption told through the eyes of two hearts who had chosen mercy over revenge. London changed again, slowly but surely. Charity began to replace pretense. Some of the old lords opened schools, others hospitals. Perhaps guilt had ripened into grace. Perhaps hope had learned patience. Years passed softly. The Duke's hair grew silver. Laura's eyes remained young, full of the same gentle defiance that had once turned a market into a miracle. The city called her Lady of the Red Garden. She never corrected them. Every evening, they walked through the roses together. The air always carried the scent of the herb she had once chosen without hesitation, rosemary for remembrance. It grew wild now, filling every corner of the garden. The Duke said it was her doing. She said the earth simply remembered kindness. On the 10th anniversary of the fall of the order, a visitor came. A young woman in gray stood at the gate holding a small parcel wrapped in linen. Her eyes were calm but familiar. She said she had been raised in a convent by a woman who once called herself Eveline. Before her death, Eveline had written one final letter and asked it be delivered here. Laura accepted the parcel and waited until sunset to open it. Inside lay a single black ribbon and a note written in the same elegant hand that had once summoned storms. Forgive what ambition destroyed. Keep what love repaired. The ivy was never meant to strangle, only to hold. Laura read the words twice, then set them by the candlelight. She whispered that forgiveness was not earned, it was given. Then she folded the letter and placed it between the pages of their book. That night she and the Duke sat by the fire in silence. Outside the garden glowed with lanterns and stars. He said every story must end. She said not while someone remembers. He smiled and kissed her hand. Then he whispered that if stories live in the hearts of others, they never really stop. The clock ticked softly. The fire dimmed, and the world beyond their walls kept spinning toward new beginnings. In the years that followed, children grew up reading the tale of the Duke and the girl in red. Some said it was legend, others said it was truth. But all agreed on one thing. The world had once been darker, and two souls had dared to light a candle. When Laura passed many years later, the garden bloomed that same week with red roses and rosemary. The servants swore the scent lingered for days. The Duke lived long enough to see the ivy grow white with flowers. He would sit by her grave each morning, whispering her name as if she could still hear, and when he finally joined her, London did not mourn. It simply bowed its head and thanked them both. Centuries later, the book remained in the library of Ashbourne House. Its cover worn, its pages yellowed, its message eternal. On the first page, written in faded ink, were 5 words that time refused to erase. Light is never wasted here, and beneath it, pressed between 2 pages, the smallest sprig of rosemary, still green, still fragrant, still alive. The years had turned gently now, like pages read by kind hands. Ashbourne House no longer belonged to a single name or story. It belonged to everyone who stepped through its gates and felt, even for a moment, that peace was possible after pain. The roses bloomed early that spring. Children ran through the garden with laughter that healed more than sermons ever could. The air smelled of rain, of rosemary, and of memory refusing to die. The Duke and Laura's resting place lay beneath the oldest tree, surrounded by light. There were no marble statues, no heavy titles carved in stone, only their names side by side and a simple line below. Where love chose mercy, the world began again. Visitors still came, some seeking history, some seeking hope. They left flowers, tears, prayers, and silence. But the garden did not demand anything from them. It simply gave peace the way light gives warmth to those who remember to stand still. Inside the library, the book remained open, waiting. Its last page carried a note written in Laura's own hand, faint but still readable. If you have come this far, let your heart rest a little. Forgive what wounded you and do not fear to begin again. Kindness is not weakness. It is the quiet strength that rebuilds everything time tries to take. Whatever darkness you carry, remember this. Light is not meant to erase it, but to help you see your way through. The ink had faded, yet the truth inside those words still breathed. It was the kind of message that traveled beyond centuries, beyond stories, beyond endings. Because some stories never end, they become lessons disguised as memory. They become the courage someone else needs to start again. And so, dear listener, if you have walked beside Laura and the Duke through every chapter, thank you. Thank you for feeling with them. For believing in redemption even when the night felt endless. For holding on to light, even when the world asked you to let go. May you carry from this story not only romance and mystery, but gentleness. May you remember that the smallest act of love, one word, one prayer, one quiet moment of truth, can undo years of silence. And when life grows cold, may you find warmth in simple things. A friend's voice, a morning breeze, a bit of rosemary pressed between your pages. Because just like Laura and the Duke, you too are proof that hearts can heal. That light, no matter how fragile, never stops shining for those who refuse to stop hoping. So before this candle fades and the final words rest, know this from my heart to yours. Your story still matters. You are still becoming, and the world is gentler because you are here. If this tale touched your soul, share it. Tell someone you love them today. Leave a kind word in the world and watch it grow. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for walking through the night to find the dawn with me. Until our next story, may your days be filled with grace, peace, and light that never ends. Remember, love always wins, mercy always heals, and light is never wasted here.